We have been going through the book of Matthew, looking at Jesus' interactions with his disciples, asking ourselves, what was he trying to teach to the disciples then? And as his current day disciples, what can we learn from those lessons? Today we find ourselves in the end of chapter 14, once again in the book of Matthew. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. And this is a story that's very familiar. This is a story that if you attended Sunday school growing up, you would have heard. If you've been in the church for a good amount of time, you most likely have heard this story from a sermon or in your own personal devotions. It's a story of Jesus walking on water. But it wasn't just Christ that walked on the water this day. And so we pick up in verse 22, and it reads, "Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When the evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was long away from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, 'It is a ghost.' But they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, 'Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid.' And Peter answered him, 'Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water.' And he said, 'Come.' So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, 'Lord, save me.' Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying, 'O you of little faith, why did you doubt?' And when they got back into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly, you are the Son of God.'" Now this is, as I said, a story that many of us will be familiar with. It's a story that is just one that most people know. In fact, even people outside of the Christian faith will often know this story. Maybe not well, but they'll know the reference of it. And a lot of people have tried to explain away this story because it doesn't agree with the laws of physics, that Jesus would walk on water. You can think right now in Nova Scotia here, the lakes are finally just starting to freeze a little bit. And there's this thin layer of ice, and even that's not enough. Like you could have a boat in the middle of the lake, but you can't really walk out on the ice onto that, you'll break away. And I have heard people try to say that, well, maybe Jesus was walking on a sandbar, and so then from the boat, it appears that he was walking on the water. It's a ridiculous claim. It doesn't add up. It says that they were already far off into the water and that the waves were quite heavy. And then also we have Peter getting out of the boat. Did he happen to also land directly onto a sandbar? And then he's walking, and at one point, he slips off of the sandbar. And if it was a sandbar, the text would tell us that. And so that doesn't add up. I've heard even more of a ridiculous claim is that Jesus got onto a sheet of ice that then floated out towards the boat. How did he steer it? How did he know it would take him where it was going? Why was there ice there? If it was wavy, wouldn't it have broken? How did he keep his footing? It's this whole idea, really, of trying to take the deity away from Christ, which in fact the story actually confirms and affirms Christ's deity and talks about that he is the Son of God. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this because it's such an important thing. So we have the disciples out on this boat. Now these are men who, for most of them, they spent a good amount of time on a boat. And so they have a wind facing them. It's wavy. They're not scared for their life like they were in another story. But regardless, they're working to get across this body of water. Then they look out and they see this figure walking on the water. They're scared, terrified. What could that be? It's a ghost. Jesus cries out to them, "Don't be afraid, it's just me." And Peter, in this moment, I wonder what was going through his head. Why would he say, "If you call out to me, I will go"? A moment of faith. Maybe he wanted to have that experience, that encounter. Maybe he just really loved Christ, wanted to be with him in that moment. Whatever it was, he says to Jesus, if you call to me, I will come to you. And Jesus says, all right, come on over. And so he steps out of the boat, and everyone, if you can think about that, he's expecting to fall into the water. But he doesn't. He walks on top of the water. Pastor David Slonwhite here in our church, he did a wonderful sermon a while ago about this, about keeping your eyes on Christ. And we have this picture of Peter walking towards Christ, looking at him, walking on the water, defying the laws of gravity here. And then he sees the waves. His concentration is taken off of Christ and onto the situation around him, and he starts to sink. And in his despair, he cries out, Lord, help me. And then Jesus reaches down, grabs his hand, pulls him up, and together they walk to the boat and get onto the boat. Now, what I have seen happen, you've seen this maybe in videos or in news articles or heard stories about this, or maybe you yourself have gone through this moment, is people trying this, of saying like, Lord, I really believe in you, and then they'll, for some reason, think that means that they can walk on water, and so they'll run quickly out onto a lake, or they'll run off of a dock, or they'll jump out of their canoe, and they learn quickly that that's not how this works. In church culture, there's this whole wing we really need to be cautious against, of this idea that we can control the Spirit of God. When it's listing, for example, the gifts of the Spirit, like these things like healing and prophecy, it says that we receive these things as the Spirit of God sees fit. It's not something that I can just say, I'm going to heal in this moment, or I'm going to prophesy now, and then the Spirit of God, for some reason, would submit to our authority. It's not that at all. And likewise, with this miracle of walking on water, it's not something that you can command for God to do. In fact, Peter didn't. He said, Lord, if you say to me to come, then I will. Not I'm coming out there, make me be able to do this. But Lord, if it's in your will, if you will call to me, then I will do that. The reality is that there's a lot of times that people will try to do supernatural things, to do miraculous things, and God has not called them to do that. And so they sink. That's one thought to look at. But there's also the thought to look out that when we are doing the work of God, when we are pursuing those things, that we have our eyes fixed on Christ. It's not a time to look at the situation around us and be overwhelmed by that, and then all of a sudden think, I can't be on the water. I can't be doing this. This is too much for me. And then in that moment, we start to sink. Instead, no, we keep our eyes focused on Christ and realize that it's by His strength, it's by His will that we can do what He calls us to do. Very important distinction there. But what's really important about this story is what happens after they get back into the boat. It says that they get back into the boat, the wind ceased, right? So all of a sudden the concern's gone, the water flattens out in that mirror-like state. It's wonderful to observe. And the disciples now, they don't have to worry about rigging the sails or paddling or watching or looking out for big waves and that kind of thing. They can be right there in the moment, and it says that they got down and they worshiped Christ, and they said, truly you are the Son of God. And so why did Peter walk on the water? Why did Jesus walk on the water? Why didn't He just go to the other side and meet them where they were coming? Why did He go out and do this grand, miraculous gesture for the glory of God? I mean, that's why Christ did everything that He did. And it's through this act, and it's through Peter being rescued from the water and pulled up and walking on that and coming in, that they see, truly you are the Son of God, and they worship Him. It's to glorify God. And a lot of people, there's this sense of obsession over lifting up their own name. We see church leaders and leaders in church culture, in Christian culture, that want to promote their name. They want to build up some sort of reputation for themselves. We're not called to do that. We're called to be humble and to glorify God, and that everything we do, it's not, look at how great Peter is. Peter walked on water. Peter's response would be, look at how great Christ is. He called me out here, and when I started to sink, he carried me through it. We're to worship God in all that we do, in all of our actions, in all the great feats that we do, and in the wonderful things that God will use you to do. It's never about how great you are. It's never about how wonderful your pastor is, or any of that stuff, but how good God is. And if you're a leader at any capacity, you need to walk in that. You need to walk in this understanding of, I operate solely to bring glory to God and to point towards Him. Not to myself, not for my own glory or my own ego, but that I would put that off and point to Christ, fully being focused on Him. And then when we see the great thing being done, when you see miraculous things, I do believe in miraculous things. I believe in healing. I believe in prophecy. I believe in those sort of things. And when we see them and they're true, and they're actually the work of God, and we see them being done, and we've tested them as the Bible tells us to, and then that happens, it's not a, oh man, prophet so-and-so, that was a wonderful prophecy, good job. Or to someone who heals, oh, how great you are. Or to be even in the prophecy, or in the healing, or in the word of knowledge, or in the miracle itself. Not to be amazed with it, not to be focused on it, but rather that our attention would be on the one who made it possible, on the voice of Christ. It's not a miracle that Peter walked on water. Well, it is, but it's not that brings glory. And it's not how great you are, Peter, but how great Christ is that He said, come, and then made you able to walk on the water. In the same way, when we see these miracles and when we see divine intervention in our living, we have to be reminded that it's not the intervention, it's not the act that's taking place that is wonderful, but the one who is making it possible, that in all things we glorify God. And so for us in our daily living, have those opportunities where you say, Lord, I feel, it seems like you're putting me in a situation where you want me to respond in this way. If that is the case, then give me the ability and the know-how and the wisdom and direction and discernment to know how to go about this, and may I walk in your strength and in your understanding. And then when God does use us for His purposes, may our response be, it's not about me, but how great my God is. In all things, and you'll see me end prayers with this often, Lord, may we be pleasing in your sight. May we glorify you in all that we do. That should be one of the cries of our heart, that in all times we look for that as the opportunity. I hope that's helpful to you this week, and I hope that, as I just said, in everything you do, that you glorify God, honor Him, point others towards Him, and lift up His name. Love you guys, and have a great week.